It was supposed to be the fairy tale. She had met him when she was still young, just starting out in life, unsure of who she was or where she was going. But when he came into her world, everything changed. The way he looked at her, the way he cared for her, it was as if she'd finally found the person she was meant to be with. They were perfect for each other. Friends and family adored him. Her heart fluttered every time he smiled. He treated her with respect, with kindness, with love. He was the perfect fiancé, the man of her dreams. They'd been together for years now, living in a cozy apartment filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of love you hear about in fairy tales. And soon, they were going to get married. The dress was picked out, the date set, the invites ready to be sent out. She had it all, a bright future, a man who adored her, and a life that seemed like it was heading straight to bliss, but little did she know, the man she thought she knew so well was hiding something. It all started with something small, something insignificant, or at least that's how it seemed at the time. He was working late, coming home later and later, until one day she noticed the change in him. He was distant, distracted, his eyes no longer sparkled when they locked with hers. She tried not to notice it. She told herself that it was nothing, that maybe he was just stressed from work, but deep down, she could feel it. There was something wrong. It was a late evening when everything fell apart. He had gone out for a drink with some colleagues, something she used to enjoy hearing about, but now it seemed strange. She told herself she was being paranoid, but something urged her to check his phone. It wasn't like her to snoop, but when she saw a message pop up with a name she didn't recognize, she couldn't resist. The message was simple. It was from a woman. Her heart skipped a beat. It read, "I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight." Her world came crashing down. She knew in that moment. She knew what was happening. He had been unfaithful. The one person she had trusted above everyone else had betrayed her in the most painful way imaginable. Her hands trembled as she put the phone down, her mind racing with questions. How could he? Why would he do this to her? What had gone wrong? They had been so happy, or at least, that's how it seemed to her. He had made her feel like she was the only one who mattered. But now, everything she had believed in felt like a lie. That night, he came home later than usual. His face was flushed, his breath slightly off. She could feel the tension in the air before he even spoke. As he walked in, she stood up, her heart beating so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "How was your night?" she asked, her voice shaking despite herself. "Fine," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "Just work stuff." But she couldn't take it anymore. She needed answers. She demanded the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long moment, he said nothing, and she could see the guilt in his eyes. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. When he finally spoke, it wasn't with the remorse she had expected. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I've been seeing someone else. It's over now, though." The words hit her like a slap across the face. The pain, the confusion, the betrayal, it was too much. She stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend what he was saying. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. This wasn't the man she loved. The confrontation that followed was brutal. The words she threw at him were sharp, bitter, laced with all the hurt she had never imagined she'd feel. But amidst the anger, there was a sadness that overwhelmed her. How could someone who had promised to love her forever do this? She had given him everything. And now, she was left with nothing but the shards of her broken heart. The following days were filled with silence and confusion. She didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to make sense of it all. She tried to pretend things could go back to normal, that somehow she could forgive him and move on. But every time she looked at him, she couldn't see the man she had once trusted. Instead, all she saw was the person who had shattered her trust, broken her heart, and destroyed the future they had dreamed of together. And then, the choice she would have to make came. She could stay. She could forgive him. She could try to rebuild, even though the foundation of their relationship had been cracked beyond repair. Or she could walk away. She could leave him, find herself again, and start over. But that choice wasn't easy. Her heart ached at the thought of walking away from someone she had loved so deeply. And yet, how could she stay with someone who had betrayed her so cruelly? The days dragged on, and the pain of betrayal seemed to consume her, yet she knew something had to give. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of what had been. Her life had been ripped apart in a way she couldn't have imagined, but perhaps, in the end, it would be the catalyst for her to rebuild, stronger than before. The decision was hers to make. No one could make it for her, and as the story goes, sometimes the hardest part isn't the heartbreak itself, but the courage it takes to choose a new path, to rebuild your life after the devastation of trust being broken. But the question remains, what happens when you've been betrayed by the one person you thought would always have your back? Days turned into weeks, and despite the weight of the betrayal on her shoulders, life seemed to continue on as if nothing had changed. She went to work, met up with friends, and tried to keep herself occupied, but there was a constant undercurrent of pain that followed her wherever she went. Her mind kept replaying the moment she had discovered the messages, over and over again. It was as if the universe had conspired to shatter her reality in a single, crushing blow. She couldn't stop thinking about the woman, the one who had taken what was supposed to be hers. The woman who had somehow slipped into their lives, into their relationship, without her even noticing. How long had it been going on? Was she just a side piece, or had he been in love with her? Was she better than her in ways she couldn't even imagine? Every question haunted her, and there was no answer that could soothe the fire that burned inside her. Then there was him, the man who had once promised to cherish her forever, who had sworn he would never hurt her. She had wanted to believe that he was truly sorry, that his confession had come from a place of regret. But the truth was that the apology felt hollow, as though he was more sorry for being caught than for actually betraying her. His actions didn't match his words, and the more she looked at him, the more she realized that she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. Still, there were moments, tiny flashes of the man she had once loved, that made her question if it was worth trying again. His eyes would soften when he looked at her, and he would try to comfort her, touching her shoulder gently as if the intimacy between them hadn't been shattered. He would bring her coffee in the mornings, just like he used to, or try to make her laugh, but the smile that spread across her face felt forced, as if it didn't belong there anymore. The nights were the hardest. The silence in their apartment stretched on, deafening. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with her thoughts. The bed, once shared in warmth and love, now felt empty. She could almost feel the distance between them, even when he was right next to her. He would reach out, trying to hold her, but she recoiled. She couldn't let him back in. Not yet. Not after what he had done. One evening, she decided to take a step back and clear her head. She left the apartment with no destination in mind, just needing to escape the suffocating feeling that had taken root in her chest. She walked through the streets, her feet carrying her aimlessly. The city lights flickered above her, but none of them seemed to brighten the path ahead. It was then, as she walked along the familiar streets they used to stroll down together, that she encountered someone she hadn't seen in years, an old friend from college. His name was Sam, and he had always been a part of her life, even though their paths had diverged after graduation. Sam had been a supportive friend, the kind of person who always knew how to make her laugh. Back then, they had shared endless conversations about life, love, and their futures, but life had pulled them in different directions. When he saw her walking alone, he immediately recognized the sadness in her eyes. He stopped her, a concerned expression on his face. "Hey, it's been ages. Are you okay?" Sam asked, his voice laced with genuine care. She smiled weakly, her heart heavy. I don't really know." They found a nearby cafe and sat down. Sam listened as she poured out her heart to him, telling him everything, about her fiancé, about the affair, and about the mess she now found herself in. She didn't expect him to offer solutions, but just having someone there who didn't judge her, who didn't know the man she had once called her future, made her feel lighter. "You deserve better," Sam said quietly, after a long pause. "You deserve someone who sees you for who you really are, not just someone to keep around when it's convenient for them." His words cut deep, but in a way, it was the truth she had been avoiding. For so long, she had been holding on to the past, unwilling to face the reality that she had been treated unfairly. She had given everything to a man who, at the end of the day, had taken her for granted. That night, Sam drove her home, and as he pulled up outside her apartment, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort. He had offered her no judgment, no expectations, just an open ear and a kind heart. He didn't ask her to make any decisions right away, but something in her had shifted. She realized that, no matter what she decided, she had the strength to move forward. As she walked back into her apartment, she found him sitting on the couch, waiting for her. He was staring at the floor, his body tense. She could tell he had been thinking, replaying everything in his mind. He had probably hoped she would come back to him with open arms, that the hurt would magically disappear with time, but it didn't work that way. She took a deep breath and sat down across from him. She could feel his eyes on her, pleading, but she knew now was the time for her to make a decision, one that would change the course of her life forever. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice calm but firm. "How long has this been going on?" His face fell. He had been hoping to avoid this moment. His words stumbled as he tried to explain. "It wasn't intentional. It just happened." She shook her head. "I don't want excuses. I want honesty. I deserve that much." He sighed, his gaze falling to the floor. "It started a few months ago. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, but it did." The weight of his confession was too much to bear. She stood up, pacing around the room, her heart aching in ways she couldn't express. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the realization that everything she had believed in had been a lie. All their plans, their dreams, none of it had been real to him. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she whispered, the tears welling up in her eyes. He looked up at her, his face full of desperation. "Please, don't leave me. I love you. I made a mistake." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to forgive him. But the betrayal ran too deep, and she knew deep down that trust, once broken, could never truly be fixed. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "And I don't know if I want to try anymore." As she walked away from him that night, the finality of her words hung heavy in the air. It was a decision she had never thought she would make, but the truth had set her free in a way she couldn't have imagined. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be filled with heartbreak, with questions that didn't have easy answers. But she knew that, no matter what, she was going to rebuild. She was going to find herself again, even if it meant walking away from the person who had once meant everything to her. And so, she made the choice, the hardest, most painful choice of her life. She walked away from the man she thought she would spend forever with. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she was strong enough to face it, with or without him.